საღამოშვიდობისა, დღეს ჩვენი სტუმარია ბატონი ბრაიან ბრაუნი, რომელიც ამერიკის შეერთებული შტატებიდან გვეწვია. ბატონი ბრაუნი ოჯახის დაცვის მსოფლიო კონგრესისა და ქორწინების ეროვნული ორგანიზაციის პრეზიდენტია. მის მიერვე იქნა დაფუძნებული ახლა უკვე საყოველთაო ცნობილი ოჯახის დაცვის საერთაშორისო ორგანიზაცია. Mr. Brown, let me welcome you to our TV station.
Thank you.
What are the primary goals of your organization?
Well, it's pretty simple. We exist to unite and equip leaders around the world to defend and protect the natural family, the family union of a husband and wife and any children that they may bring into this world.
Recently, gay marriage became legal in the United States. What are those new challenges that your organization faces in this drastically changed environment?
Well, you have to realize that in the United States we had referenda in over 32 states. So
on this issue?
On this issue of same-sex marriage, including some of our most liberal states. You know, I moved to California in 2008 to help run the Proposition 8 initiative, which was to amend the Constitution of the state of California to define marriage as the union of a man and a woman. Now, all of my friends in Washington, D.C. said there was no chance we were going to win in California. But they were wrong. Even in a state like California, a very liberal state, the reality was that people understood that marriage is the union of a man and a woman, and they didn't want it changed. So the background to what happened in the United States is not one of loss. It's that the pro-family side had many victories going straight to the people. But that our courts, unfortunately, decided that they were not going to be courts, they were going to become legislatures and dictate to the country what they believed and not allow the democratic process to play out. So just a few years ago, in a decision called the Obergefell decision, we had our United States Supreme Court, without any real history, without any real logic, without any attention paid to the fact that all of our founding fathers and all of our history understood that marriage was the union of a man and a woman. Out of thin air, our Supreme Court, because it's the liberal thing to do, in a 5-4 decision, split decision, 5 justices voted the wrong way, 4 voted the right, found the right way, forced same-sex marriage on the country. Now, over 60 million voters had voted to protect marriage as the union of a man and a woman. So it was a disastrous decision for our court to embark upon. We continue to have the reverberations and effects from it. There's a complete loss of respect in many ways for our courts, because how can you trust the courts if the courts can just enforce their will on everyone? So it's been a very difficult and troubling decision, both for the underlying issues, but also for what kind of government we have. I would say the most important direct consequences have been affecting basic freedom to speak and to act for Christians and other faiths that believe that marriage is the union of a man and a woman. We've seen videographers fined, florists fined and brought up on anti-discrimination lawsuits. We've seen wedding halls closed down. What do I mean? Well, in any case where a Christian was involved in the weddings, if they then said, I will have nothing to do with same-sex, so-called same-sex marriages, then the state would come in and say, this goes against anti-discrimination laws. And in some cases, it wasn't even just the 2 individuals filing a lawsuit. Some states, like Washington State, filed its own lawsuit against a florist who refused to use her talents to create floral arrangements for a so-called same-sex marriage. So religious freedom and the ability for Christians to live out the gospel truth. We've even seen some threats. Some senators have said we need to strip the nonprofit status of churches because these churches won't accept the definition of the new definition of marriage.
I really wanted to ask you about the priests in this situation. I mean, can they, let's say no to people to come, let's say homosexuals that want to get married at the church? Or what's happening with that?
Well, luckily, we have such a deep tradition in the United States of respect for religious freedom that even during the debates on same-sex marriage, proponents tried to say, never will a priest or pastor be forced to engage in a same-sex quote-unquote marriage. But even having said that, in any ways that are public, maybe not going so far as telling a priest you have to take part in a same-sex marriage, but telling a church that if it doesn't endorse same-sex marriage, then potentially it's liable for having its tax-exempt status removed. So in any area where the church, because churches are not just entities that only minister to themselves, they also deal with the outside, with the gospel message. So any area where the church intersects with the public, there's a potential liability for the church. A perfect example is with adoptions. Catholic Charities Adoption Agency in Boston, Massachusetts, placed some of the most difficult children for adoption, older children, 13, 14-year-olds that had been moved from place to place. It didn't place a ton of children for adoption, but the children it did place, it changed their lives. And we had the state of Massachusetts come in and say, because you will not place children with same-sex couples, this violates non-discrimination ordinances, we are stripping you of your adoption license. This is not just in some Orwellian, future. This is now. This already happened. So across the country, we've seen adoption agencies, depending on the jurisdiction, being threatened with having their adoption licenses removed. Catholic, evangelical, Orthodox Jewish, whatever it is, anyone that understands the truth about marriage, they've seen their ability to do good pulled back. They've been being threatened with losing your adoption, your license to adopt children simply because you believe what the church has always believed. It's hard to believe we're at this point in history.
Incredible. In Georgia, much like in the US, the liberal mass media actively promotes so-called alternative lifestyle, homosexuality, disrespect of authority, including religion, etc., etc. These are presented like core values of American society as such, totally ignoring conservative values that are predominant among Americans. More than 90% of Americans believe in God, after all. What's your take on this?
Well, I think that a lot of money has been spent on trying to change American views on sexuality, on the family, on all of these issues that you've laid out, that liberalism has made some inroads in the United States. But around the world, we're presented with the image that there's only one America, and it's the America of liberal elites. The real America is traveling through Texas or Wyoming or Iowa or even in parts of California. If you go from place to place and you talk to Americans and you ask what's most important, their Christian faith, their families, these are the most important things. And if you delve further and ask what they think about an issue like abortion or same-sex marriage, overwhelmingly they oppose abortion, they oppose same-sex marriage. They'll stare at you and say, that's not even possible. So, I think it's important for the rest of the world to understand that, I don't feel alone in the US. I may feel alone at cocktail parties in New York City. I know that if I go to events in San Francisco or New York or Los Angeles and I'm asked about my position on marriage, I know that I'll be made to feel as if I'm somehow wrong or that I don't belong. But, look, that's not a lot to suffer for standing for the truth. I know that in the overwhelming majority of places in America, people believe what I believe. They believe what you believe. And that's, I think, the unique opportunity at this point in history that we're at, is that I can be here in Georgia with you. I can be halfway across the world from my home, and I can feel and know that we share many of the same values and that we feel in the same position. And whether I'm in Africa or I'm here in Georgia or I'm in Hungary, and I talk to people, they have the same fears, the same anxieties, the same worries about the direction that the world is going, that their faith is not being respected, their families aren't being respected, their national identities aren't being respected, and that they don't want an outside force coming in and trying to impose on them an alien ideology. I think that the same-sex marriage movement has spent a lot of time, effort, and has been very smart in trying in marketing the whole idea of same-sex marriage. But if you think about it for a little bit, what is same-sex marriage? Whose rights are being abridged? Well, what happens to the child? In America now, with same-sex marriage, we have automatic ability for same-sex couples to adopt. So doesn't a child have a right to have both a mother and a father? Doesn't a child have a right to have some form of a natural family? What same-sex marriage is adult desires trumping children's real needs. So if you're going to make this a rights question, what about the rights of children? What about the rights of the rest of society? What about the idea that there's something natural and complementary of male and female? And that when you make this change in the law, it's going to have all of these other changes. It doesn't surprise me at all that it took no time from when we started to see countries pass same-sex marriage legislation. It took no time at all to then move on to the whole transgender issue. Because at our root, we are male and female. At our root, we are made for each other. Husbands and wives are not the same. There's a beauty in the difference. There's a beauty in the complementarity. And that beauty is in the best interest of children. So what same-sex marriage is a lie put into the law. Same-sex marriage doesn't exist. It's like in the United States when we had slavery. Slavery was a lie put into the law. No man can be owned by another man. You could put a lie into the law, you can convince people for a long period of time, but it still remains a lie. And that, I think, is why people are waking up. They're seeing that, I think some people supported same-sex marriage because they didn't want to appear or feel bad, like they were the mean people stopping people from loving themselves. But ultimately, this doesn't lead to happiness. And as I said about the transgender issue, that happened almost immediately after. And I think normal Americans and people around the world then sort of woke up and said, what are we doing here? We're actually telling little boys that they can be girls, little girls, that they can be boys. We're actually telling Christian churches and schools that you can't have separate male-female restrooms. I mean, it's deconstructing the very nature of what it means to be a human being, and there are going to be huge consequences to doing that. And we're starting to see them, and I think that's why there's some pushback around the world. As for us, same-sex marriage doesn't exist. We have a lie that's in the law. We have two men or two women saying that they're married, but they can't be married. Marriage by its nature requires male and female. So, I would say that it's easy to say that there's a right to something. I can claim a right to anything. But real rights come from who we are as human persons. They come from our dignity as human persons. Anything that doesn't comply, anything that doesn't, that isn't in order with and doesn't follow from our dignity as human persons is not a real right. And so there was never a right to same-sex marriage. There never was a right to same-sex marriage at all. But that was the marketing tool that was used to convince people to support it.
For generations, U.S. society was strictly conservative. When did this shift towards liberalism, in its contemporary meaning, of course, in some segments of the society started? And what were the telltale signs?
Well, I think the early 60s is really the place where you can point to the biggest transformation in American life. The sexual revolution, more than anything else, brought liberalism to the United States. It was, I think, only a few months ago that Hugh Hefner died, and we read all of these obituaries and praising, fawning articles about Hugh Hefner. Well, Hugh Hefner didn't create a society of happiness. Hugh Hefner didn't create a world in which human beings felt fulfilled, happy. Instead, what we did with the sexual revolution is create moral chaos and unhappiness in our society. And so I think that what happened was, initially there was a notion that what was limiting happiness in the United States was our archaic ideas about sexuality and our inability to be truly free. And so with, you know, Playboy, with all of the materials, pornography that came out of the sexual revolution, especially the notion that pleasure is the ultimate, that personal pleasure is the straightest path to fulfillment, which I think was the big lie from the sexual revolution. I think people realized relatively quickly through the 70s that was not giving immediate fulfillment, but instead of going back to the truths that had guided our country, and especially guided middle America, the idea of, you know, God, family, country. I mean, anyone in America would have heard that, and even today, you know, the idea that these are our allegiances, God, family, country. Instead of going back in that direction, I think what occurred was that we just haven't gone far enough, that we would be truly happy if we just stripped away more and more of these old rules. And I think that's how so quickly we got from a country that was fairly conservative, even through the 60s, and where same-sex marriage was totally unheard of, not even something anyone would discuss, let alone say that it's going to become the law, to the point at which we have a Supreme Court forcing same-sex marriage on us. Now, the same-sex marriage issue is connected with the abortion issue because, again, in the abortion issue, it wasn't that Americans in 1973 and 74 said, we must have abortion. This is going to make us happy. It was our Supreme Court. Again, in both cases, the greatest transformations of American public life have not occurred through the will of the people, through the democratic process. As our founders envisioned any change would have occurred, they occurred through the imposition of an elite. So I think that elite gained strength from the 60s to the present, and I think they truly believe that it's the these old traditions, the old ways of thinking, these things that bind us, this is what makes us unhappy. And I don't think they can even pause to reconsider that belief. It's like an a priori first point for them. And so instead what we see is further and further and further attempts to free ourselves from nature. We will never be freed from nature. You know, God created us in a certain way for a reason. We'll never be able to free ourselves. So what I think instead we're seeing is the rebellion going deeper and deeper and deeper, and things that we thought would never happen. For example, you know, Bruce Jenner being on the cover of a magazine, Sports Illustrated, as a woman. Bruce Jenner is a man. You know, his problems we should be very sad for, and we should feel love and respect for people who are struggling. But we shouldn't change our view on what it means to be a man and a woman. We shouldn't lie about our nature because people struggle. And that's what we're being asked to do. And, you know, again, I'm hopeful that the left may go too far. And when they go too far, people who generally just want to live their lives and live out their faith privately and quietly, that at some point they'll realize I have an obligation to speak out.
Tell us about the Cape Town Manifesto. I was impressed when I read this manifesto. Let me quote a segment from there. Spanning the globe, we have no common tongue, culture, or creed. We're divided by history and geography, by social customs and forms of government. But in foundations, we are united. We are of one mind on the bedrock of civil society, on the basis of that first and primordial community called the family. We affirm the dignity of marriage as the conjugal bond of man and woman. We embrace it not as a parochial practice of any sect or nation or age, but as the patrimony of all mankind. We defend it not as a matter of preference or temperament or taste, but as the heart of any just social order. Wow. We're talking here a very strong statement, right? So tell us more about it.
Well, you know, what we wanted to do with the Cape Town Declaration is to join together people from around the world in a common statement defending marriage and the family, to let people know that they're not alone. And we were surprised and ecstatic about the level of leaders that signed on. I mean, we have professors at Princeton University, we have many members of parliament. We launched this in Africa, at Cape Town, to highlight, you know, we see Africa as really all of the things that you're experiencing here in Georgia and that we're seeing in Eastern Europe, that's all now coming to Africa. George Soros and others see Africa as a place where they can change society. And, you know, many African leaders I've met with have said, you know, we're not going to accept a new form of imperialism that tries to undermine the family. So that's why we launched it in Africa. It's still, we're still gathering signatures. The signatures are open all around the world. If people want to sign, they can go to capetowndeclaration.org and they can join everyone in signing. Because what we want to do, we're going to keep gathering signatures for the next year, and then we're going to obviously make public how many signatures we've gotten, and you know, make a big public display of the fact that, you know, as the declaration itself says, you know, family is not one parochial custom, it's what unites us all.
Yeah. In defending family and marriage, I'm sure you accumulated huge experience in the United States. What tactics are proven to be really foolproof in dealing with those who try to impose globalist agenda on our societies?
Well, given that in the United States we had the many victories, but we had the Supreme Court come in and overturn those victories, I think the most important tactical lesson is that wherever possible, we need to go directly to the people. What we've seen, I think I can speak also of Georgia, is that liberal elites will talk about democracy. They'll talk about liberalism. But honestly, they don't really like when the people have a direct say on their culture or their country. What I mean is, you'll notice that most of the constitution making in former Soviet republics and also throughout Eastern Europe, there's no form of, or a limited form of direct democracy where the people can have a referendum, have their, if there's any way to do things like that, to gather signatures, go directly to the people, to have a political party that actually is founded and at its core is about the family, is about protecting Georgia. You know, that needs to be done. I know it's very hard to do, but we can have a lot of great religious leaders and civil society leaders, but if there isn't any avenue for political change, then the global elites will use the avenues that they have to keep forcing this on people. You know, an anecdote on this is 10 years ago I met with some of the bishops from Mexico, and when I brought up same-sex marriage, they said that'll never happen here. After our court forced same-sex marriage in the US, a a Mexico City court forced same-sex marriage on a very conservative Mexico. Unless our opponents want this all to happen in the dark. They don't want the public to know about it. They want it to happen quickly. They want the elites to make the decisions. They want it to go to the courts, and they want people to feel like they don't have any say. The only way to combat that is to be very vocal, shine the light on these sorts of deals that are made in the court, and also, as I said, to have some avenue politically where at least one party, one leader is pure, is standing up for the truth. You know, right now the Republican Party there's some division within the Republican Party. Unfortunately, there are even Republicans who say it's fine to accept same-sex marriage. Now, the Republican Party platform is very clear. It says marriage is and only can be the union of one man and one woman. So we've done work in trying to protect that. I think that around the world, each country needs some avenue politically to stop this. You know, I understand that many religious leaders I talk to say, well, politics, that's dirty, we live in this world. Politics is a part of the world. You know, I believe Christ has dominion over everything. We can't abandon one part of the world, and you know, I guarantee you that George Soros isn't going to abandon it.
And what would you wish to Georgian people?
Well, I would hope for Georgia that Georgia is Georgia. It's not a pawn of the United States. It's not a pawn of Russia. That Georgia stands up for its national identity, and you know, I think Christianity especially is at the core of what it means to be a Georgian. So when Georgia is asked by international groups, even with big money, don't sell your soul for a pittance. Doesn't matter how much money it is. If you're going against who you are as a people, it's not worth it.
Thank you so much. We're honored to have you here.
Thank you.